My name is Olivia, and at 36, I'd built everything I thought would make my parents proud. A successful consulting firm with international clients, a townhouse in the heart of the city, zero debt. But somehow, no matter how high I climbed, all my parents saw was that I hadn't settled down. "You'll burn out chasing success," my mother would say, lips pursed, eyes scanning me like a disappointing report card. "What's the point if you have no one to come home to?" My father wouldn't say much, but his silence always landed heavier than words. I spent years trying to earn their affection, mistaking obedience for love. When I was 27, I paid off their mortgage after Dad lost his job, and they were too proud to ask for help. At 30, I covered my younger brother's college tuition when he dropped out halfway through and decided to restart at a private school out of state. When my parents retired early, citing stress and health, I gifted them a 2-month European cruise. Full package. I even helped them renovate their kitchen. Marble countertops, custom cabinets, everything Mom had always said she couldn't afford. But it was never enough. Every visit home came with its checklist of quiet judgments. "That dress is bold," Mom would remark. "I just worry you're intimidating men with all this independence," Dad would add, trying to sound lighthearted but failing. And always, always, "Still no boyfriend," followed by a look exchanged between them, disappointment polished into practiced concern. I told myself it was generational, that they didn't know how to express pride, that one day they'd see everything I'd done for them and finally say the words I'd been chasing since I was a girl. "We're proud of you." But those words never came. Instead, I learned to smile through the sting, to write the checks, send the gifts, show up when needed, always hoping the next act of generosity would be the one that tipped the scale. It never did. Still, I kept giving, because some part of me, buried under years of emotional austerity, believed love could be earned if I just worked hard enough. It took one night, one dinner, to change that belief forever. The night started like any other family dinner. Too many candles, too little warmth. My mother had insisted on making her famous roast, a dish that once meant comfort but now tasted like obligation. My father poured wine with the solemnity of a man attending a funeral, not a meal. "I saw your latest interview," Mom said over clinking cutlery. "On that business podcast? What was it called?" I smiled politely. Modern visionaries. They wanted to talk about scaling ethically and... "Yes, that," she cut in. "You look tired. All those hours are aging you." My fork paused mid-air. I laughed lightly, masking the sting. "Well, running a company doesn't leave much time for facials." Dad chuckled. "Maybe if you spent less time with spreadsheets and more time with people, you wouldn't be so... intense." "Intense?" I echoed, my tone neutral. "You're 36, Olivia," Mom added, as if that number was a diagnosis. "You can't keep chasing success forever. One day you'll come home to an empty house, and then what? Your money won't keep you warm." I stared at them, the clink of cutlery fading behind the pulse pounding in my ears. For a moment, I saw myself through their eyes, not as the daughter who had funded their retirement, who kept their lights on and health insurance paid, but as a woman whose worth was measured only by whether she'd put a ring on her finger. "You've done well," Dad said, "but don't you want something more? Someone?" Someone. As if everything I had built, every late night, every risk, every client saved, was just a placeholder until a man arrived to validate it. I pushed my plate back and folded my napkins slowly. "You're right," I said, my voice calm, even. "I do want more." My mother smiled, misunderstanding completely. "I want more respect," I continued, "more appreciation, and a life where I'm not constantly belittled for daring to be enough on my own." Their expressions faltered. That was the moment something shifted, not in them, in me. I saw the futility of chasing approval from people who only saw lack. I stood, kissed my mother on the cheek, and thanked her for dinner. On the way home, I didn't cry. I planned. I waited 3 days before writing the letter, not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted every word to land with precision, not cruelty, just clarity. I'd spent most of my life trying to translate their indifference into affection, to mold myself into someone they'd finally recognize as worthy. I was done shaping myself around their silence. The letter was short, no theatrics, no blame. I've spent years giving, time, money, energy, hoping it would eventually earn me love or even basic respect. I paid off your mortgage, covered tuition, planned trips, and kept giving, thinking one day you'd look at me and say, "We're proud," but you never did. I finally understand that love isn't something you're supposed to purchase, and I deserve love that isn't transactional. Effective immediately, I will no longer be providing financial or emotional support. I wish you peace, but from a distance. I didn't sign it, "Love Olivia." I just signed it, "Olivia." I emailed it first, then printed a copy and sent it by courier. They couldn't claim it hadn't arrived. Their response came a week later, a chilly text from my mother. "We don't know what's gotten into you, but we're not going to beg. If you need time, take it. Just don't expect us to sit around waiting." No apology, no reflection, just the same emotional detachment wrapped in passive-aggressive condescension. My father never replied. My brother sent a single thumbs-up emoji to the group chat 2 days later, followed by a meme I didn't bother to open. I could practically hear them thinking, "She'll come crawling back. They always do." But I didn't. Instead, I removed their names from my payroll account, canceled the monthly transfers, deleted the shared calendar invites, and changed the alarm code to my house. Not out of malice, but necessity. Grief doesn't always come from death. Sometimes it comes from realizing the people you've loved the longest have never really seen you. So I buried the version of me that lived for their approval. And for the first time in years, I began to breathe freely. The first few weeks were the quietest I'd ever known. No daily texts from Mom reminding me I was cutting it close to childbearing years. No calls asking for money, just until next month. No cold dinners where my success was met with furrowed brows and forced smiles. The silence should have been lonely, but instead, it felt like the first real peace I'd tasted in decades. I booked a solo trip to Portugal, then another to Kyoto. In between flights, I started therapy. Real therapy. Not the self-help podcasts I used to fall asleep to. I didn't just unpack my trauma. I laid it all out like blueprints and began rebuilding from the ground up. I took morning walks instead of checking emails. I invested in myself the way I used to invest in other people, generously. A new mentorship program, Pilates, cooking classes. I started saying no without explanation. I realized how much of my life had been shaped by fear. Fear of being unworthy, unloved, forgotten. And I worked, not for validation, but for vision. I restructured my company, aligning it more closely with my values. I cut ties with a few toxic clients and reinvested in the ones who respected my time and my brain. The shift was immediate. Revenue climbed. So did my peace. I began keeping a private journal, not just thoughts, but proof. I logged milestones, emotional wins, breakthroughs in therapy, quiet moments where I chose peace over reaction. I included screenshots of texts, old emails, and photos from my trips. I didn't know yet why I felt compelled to document it all so carefully. But I trusted the instinct. Healing wasn't loud or linear. Some days, I still wondered what it would have been like to have parents who clapped instead of criticized, but I no longer let those thoughts steer my choices. For the first time in my life, I was no one's daughter, no one's fixer, no one's financial safety net. I was just Olivia, and for the first time, that felt like enough. It happened at a tech conference in Chicago, one I almost skipped. The keynote speaker had dropped out last minute, and the replacement was someone I didn't recognize. But something told me to go anyway. I'd spent the past year saying yes to the unexpected, and that instinct hadn't failed me yet. Jackson was speaking on ethical investing. a topic usually delivered with the enthusiasm of dry toast. But he had a way of making strategy sound like poetry. He spoke with intention, not ego. Intelligence without the need to dominate. I watched from the back of the room, notebook in hand, not taking notes, just listening. Afterward, I ran into him by the coffee table, both of us reaching for the same oat milk. "Looks like we share a caffeine philosophy," he said, offering a quiet smile. "Or just really good taste," I replied, matching his energy. We talked for 15 minutes that felt like 5, about capital that didn't crush creativity, about entrepreneurs who cared more about impact than headlines. He asked about my work, and when I explained it, he didn't try to one-up me or reduce it to something simpler. "That's smart," he said, "and personal. I can tell." That night, he emailed me a short note. "I really appreciated our conversation today. You see things clearly. If you ever want to talk shop or life, I'm around." No flirting, no agenda, just presence. We started talking, then texting, then calling. He never rushed it. He didn't make grand declarations or try to impress me with big moves. He listened. He remembered the small things. He asked questions that made me think, and more than that, made me feel seen. Not once did he ask about my relationship status or make me feel like my success came at the cost of femininity. He didn't need me to be smaller so he could feel bigger. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to shrink to be loved. And that, more than anything, was the beginning of something different. The first time Jackson and I worked together professionally, it was over coffee and a notebook in my living room. No suits, no contracts, just an idea. I'd been playing with the concept of a second company, one that focused on mentoring women-led startups, but not in the performative, polished way so many firms marketed. I wanted something real, funding, guidance, and partnership without strings or condescension. Jackson didn't just say it was a good idea. He asked how I wanted it to feel, what kind of legacy I wanted to leave behind. His mind worked like mine. Strategic, but grounded in purpose. He wasn't trying to shape my vision. He wanted to help amplify it. He connected me with legal counsel who specialized in founder-friendly structures, introduced me to a few investors who weren't just interested in ROI, but real social impact. When I asked if he wanted a stake in the company, he declined. "Not unless it's what you want," he said. "I'm here to support, not to own." That line stayed with me. Support, not ownership. It was everything my parents had never understood. That partnership didn't require control. That love didn't have to come at the cost of self. We launched the company quietly. No press release, no flashy announcements, just 2 founders, some seed capital, and a shared belief that building something meaningful didn't require screaming about it. And we grew, slowly, intentionally. One founder at a time, each woman who came through our doors reminded me why I'd left my past behind. Not to escape, but to create something that didn't exist in the world I came from. Outside of work, Jackson was the same. He didn't care that I'd booked a solo trip to Iceland last winter. He encouraged it. When I spoke about my complicated family history, he never tried to fix it. He just listened. There were no conditions. No, you'd be perfect if. Just space to be fully myself. We weren't building a fantasy. We were building something real, and for the first time, I didn't feel alone doing it. The message came in late on a Tuesday, buried between investor updates and a calendar reminder for Jackson's birthday dinner. It was from my brother, Ethan, a name I hadn't seen on my phone screen in over a year. "Hey, Mom and Dad asked me to reach out. Things aren't great financially. They were wondering if you'd be willing to talk." No context, no apology, just a vague hand extended across a chasm they'd dug themselves. I stared at the message for a long moment, not out of shock. I'd been expecting something like this. When the bank account stopped being refilled, when the private health insurance didn't magically renew itself, when the luxury travel slowed to a halt, it was only a matter of time before someone picked up the phone. I didn't reply right away. I didn't need to. Ethan sent another message 2 days later. They're not asking for money, just trying to understand why you've cut them off. That one almost made me laugh. Trying to understand. As if my letter hadn't spelled it out. As if a decade of unmet expectations, veiled insults, and transactional love hadn't been clear enough. I sent a single sentence back. When they're ready to take responsibility, I'll consider a conversation. He left me on read. Jackson, ever calm, offered to talk through it, but I didn't need to. I wasn't conflicted. I'd spent too long chasing scraps of affection. I wasn't interested in performative concern now that the ATM had stopped spitting out gold cards. What struck me most was how they still couldn't say the words. No, we're sorry. No, we see now. Just a sanitized version of regret that blamed my distance, never their actions. They were misunderstood. I was too sensitive. The same script, just with a different sense of urgency. I saved the messages in a folder I no longer named Family. I'd renamed it Evidence of Growth. Let them sit with their discomfort. I'd sat with mine for years, and unlike them, I didn't need to be understood to finally feel whole. The email subject line read, "Congratulations, National Women in Business Leadership Award recipient." I blinked at it twice, half expecting it to be spam, but it wasn't. It was real. I'd been nominated months ago by one of our portfolio founders, a quiet powerhouse named Imani, who'd written that my mentorship had changed her life. Apparently, the judges had agreed. The gala was black tie, a hotel ballroom glowing with crystal chandeliers and soft jazz. I wore a sleek midnight blue gown and walked the carpet not as someone's +1, but as the honoree. When my name was called, the applause was real, not polite, not obligatory. I walked to the stage with my heart steady, heels silent on the carpet, thinking only of how far I'd come. I spoke for 5 minutes, no notes, just truth. Success isn't always about being loud. Sometimes it's about being consistent when no one's clapping. Sometimes it's about walking away from what's familiar to build something meaningful. And sometimes it's about remembering who you are when the people who should have told you didn't. The crowd stood. A few teared up. I kept my composure, but inside, something bloomed. Not pride. Validation. The next morning, the article was everywhere. From family black sheep to business icon, Olivia Morgan's rise to power. It trended on LinkedIn, got picked up by industry newsletters, even landed in a Sunday magazine. My inbox flooded. Former colleagues, strangers, young women thanking me for showing them that boundaries didn't mean bitterness. They meant survival. And then the inevitable happened. My mother called. I let it ring out. She left a voicemail. "We saw your little award. I suppose you think you've proven a point. Maybe you've matured." No congratulations, no humility, just the same condescending tone, layered with a brittle attempt at sounding gracious. She called again the next day. Then my father did. Then Ethan. I didn't answer, because when the world finally saw me, really saw me, the ones who never did had the audacity to act like they still mattered most. They'd spent years minimizing my success. Now they were scrambling to claim proximity to it. And I wasn't about to hand it to them. The third voicemail came on a Sunday morning, disguised as a compliment. "We're proud of you. Maybe you've matured enough to understand what family really means." Her voice was warm, almost rehearsed. The tone she used when talking to neighbors she wanted to impress. Not the sharp-edged version I'd known all my life. The one that turned affection into currency and silence into punishment. I played the message once, then again, just to be sure I wasn't projecting sarcasm where none existed. But no, it was there. That familiar passive-aggressive lilt, the one that dressed manipulation in pearls and lipstick. "We're proud of you. wasn't the compliment it should have been. It was a breadcrumb, a baited hook wrapped in familial nostalgia. There was no apology for the years they'd called me selfish for working late, no remorse for the dinners where my accomplishments were met with eye rolls and backhanded compliments, no acknowledgement of the pain they'd caused, just a hint that maybe I was finally becoming someone they could approve of. They hadn't changed. They'd just run out of leverage. I sat on the couch with a glass of tea, my phone still in my hand. Jackson was reading on the other side of the room, legs crossed, one eyebrow raised like he already knew what had happened. "She called again," I said quietly. He looked up. "Same song?" Different verse, less obvious, still off key. He didn't tell me what to do. He never did. Just nodded and turned the page. That's what made him different. My parents wanted to shape me into something familiar, palatable, dependent. Jackson let me unfold on my own time. I saved the voicemail to a folder labeled Lessons, next to screenshots of their texts, pictures of the award gala, and my old therapy notes. Not out of spite, out of clarity. Because when someone hands you an olive branch laced with thorns, you don't reach for it with bare hands. You recognize it for what it is, and you leave it on the table where it belongs. There was no ring hidden in champagne, no camera crew, no dramatic speech in front of strangers, just the two of us, a quiet Tuesday night, and the scent of roasted garlic drifting in from the kitchen. We'd spent the day working from my home office, laptops open, soft jazz in the background, a shared pot of tea between us. I'd finished a call with one of our new mentees, a first-time founder who had landed her first funding round. Jackson had just wrapped up a strategic call with an impact investor in Berlin. It was the kind of day that would seem unremarkable to anyone else, but it was everything to me. We were in sync, not in performance, but in presence. He handed me a small wooden box after dinner. No velvet, no drama. Inside was a delicate gold band with a tiny emerald in the center, my birthstone. "I didn't plan this with fireworks or a drone show," he said, his voice steady, "because I didn't fall in love with you for spectacle. I love you for who you are when no one's watching, and I want to build a life where you never have to shrink to fit into someone else's idea of love again." He didn't ask me to complete him or to need him. He asked if I'd choose him, and I did. Not because I needed rescuing, not because I was incomplete, but because I'd done the work and I knew who I was. Finally, fully. And who I chose to share that with wasn't an escape or a fix. It was a conscious, powerful decision. "Yes," I said, slipping the ring on my finger, "on one condition." His eyes lifted with a smile. "Anything. I still get to lead the next investment pitch." He laughed. "Deal." We toasted with tea, not champagne. No one else knew. No one else had to. Because love, when it's right, doesn't need a stage. It just needs two people who see each other, fully, without fear, and still choose to stay. We got married in Positano in a sun-drenched villa tucked into the cliffs, overlooking the sea. No white tents, no family drama, just a soft breeze, 30 people we trusted, and the kind of silence that only comes when everyone in the room is exactly where they're supposed to be. We had handwritten vows, a string quartet, and a dinner under fairy lights where the wine flowed, but no one lost their balance. It was perfect. Not because everything went according to plan, but because the love in that space was real, chosen, intentional. I didn't invite my parents. They didn't deserve front row seats to a life they spent years undermining. I didn't need their stiff smiles or passive-aggressive digs disguised as toasts. I didn't want my day tainted by the weight of expectations they never let go of. But I did write them a letter. I folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer of the nightstand in our suite the night before the ceremony. Not to send, just to write. It was short. "Tomorrow, I'm marrying a man who never asked me to be less. You won't be there, not because I'm bitter, but because I'm finally at peace. I wanted you to love me as I am. You didn't, but I do, and that's enough." I signed it simply, Olivia. Then I let it go. The morning of the wedding, I stepped into my dress, clean lines, no lace, and felt completely myself. No performance, no armor, just presence. Jackson cried when he saw me. Not a sob, not a spectacle. Just quiet emotion, the kind that comes from being seen and held for all that you are. We danced to Nina Simone under the stars, ate lemon cake, toasted to honesty and hard boundaries and soft landings. My best friend gave a speech that made me laugh until I cried, and not once did I think about what was missing, because nothing was. Closure didn't come in the form of a confrontation or a dramatic reunion. It came in the form of a quiet ceremony on a hillside in Italy, surrounded by the people who saw me clearly and stayed. It started as a small idea, a TED Talk on emotional independence. I didn't want to tell my story, not by name, but I wanted to speak to the version of myself who once sat across cold dining room tables, shrinking under the weight of criticism disguised as concern. The talk was called Love Without Permission, Reclaiming Your Worth from Conditional Families. I practiced it once in an empty room, once with Jackson, and then stepped onto that stage in a simple black dress with nothing but a clicker and the truth. There's a certain kind of grief that comes when you realize the love you were raised with wasn't love at all. It was approval you had to earn. And once you stop trying to earn it, you start to heal. I didn't name names, I didn't need to, but the subtext was clear. The girl who paid mortgages and funded retirements, who got awards and still heard, "You'll die alone," had found her voice. The talk went live on a Thursday. By Monday, it had over 1 million views. My inbox exploded. Messages from women in their 20s, 40s, 60s, thanking me for saying the thing they were never allowed to say out loud. Strangers shared their stories of being the black sheep, the scapegoat, the invisible achiever. It was like someone had cracked open a dam, and finally, the floodwaters of unspoken truth were rushing through. And then came the email from my mother. The subject line was, "We didn't know." The message itself was short. "We watched your TED Talk. We didn't realize how you felt. We're sorry if we hurt you. Please call us." There it was. Their first attempt at apology, coded in passivity. If we hurt you, didn't realize. But it was more than they'd ever offered. I stared at the screen, unmoved, because after all this time, they still couldn't quite say, "We were wrong," and more importantly, I no longer needed them to. They didn't get to rewrite the past just because the world was finally seeing me. I was no longer asking to be loved. I was already free. They asked for a meeting, not through Ethan, not through veiled voicemails or guilt-laced texts. This time, it was a formal email, sent at 7:02 a.m. by my father, who had never once used punctuation in a text message, but now ended each sentence with a period. "We'd like to talk, in person, just to listen, if you're willing." There were no conditions, no presumptions, just a quiet, unfamiliar tone, one that didn't expect a reply, but hoped for one. I waited 2 days before responding. Neutral ground, 1 hour, public place, no history, no drama. I chose a small bookstore cafe on the other side of town, not their house, not mine, a place where we were all guests. When I arrived, they were already seated. My mother wore a beige blouse too crisp for comfort. My father clutched a coffee cup like it might shatter if he gripped it too tightly. I didn't hug them. I didn't sit right away either. I took a moment. Let the silence settle. Let them see the version of me they had never taken the time to know. Calm, respected, self-contained. I finally sat. My mother spoke first. "We saw your talk," she said, her voice smaller than I remembered. "We had no idea how deep it went." My father nodded. "We failed you, not in money, but in everything that mattered more." They didn't cry. They didn't beg. And for once, they didn't defend themselves. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And that was a start. I listened, not with the desperation of a daughter seeking approval, but with the clarity of a woman who no longer needed it. When they finished, my mother reached across the table, tentative. "Can we start over?" I looked at the hand, then at her. "You can apologize," I said softly, "and I accept that. But we don't erase what happened, and we don't pretend everything's fine just because now you're uncomfortable." My voice didn't shake, not once, because the power dynamic had shifted, not because I'd taken it from them, but because I'd finally given it back to myself. We met twice more over the next 6 weeks. Short coffees, careful conversations. They tiptoed, I observed. Every word felt like walking a wire, each of us unsure if the balance would hold. Then came the question I knew was coming. "Will we be invited to your next company event?" my father asked over lunch, trying to sound casual. My mother added quickly, "It would mean a lot. We'd like to show support, publicly." I set my fork down, calmly, precisely. "You don't get access to my life just because you regret losing control," I said. Not unkindly, but with finality. Their faces stiffened. "I appreciate the apology," I continued. "Truly, and I see the effort. But there's a difference between reconnection and reintegration. Right now, we're in the first, and that's where we'll stay, until I decide otherwise." My mother looked down. My father cleared his throat. For once, neither pushed back. I'd drawn a line, and this time they could see it wasn't drawn in sand. I sent a follow-up email later that day, clear, professional, not cold, just firm. "I'm open to continuing this connection in a limited, intentional way. That means no assumptions, no uninvited appearances, no conversations that start with 'you should.' If that's acceptable, we can move forward slowly, but if it's not, then this is where it ends." They agreed. From then on, our relationship lived within new architecture, one I designed. They could email, occasionally call. I chose when and if I responded. I didn't send business updates. I didn't ask for their advice. And I didn't invite them to events that celebrated the very person they once tried to diminish. And I never again waited for their applause. Because balance, I learned, wasn't about walking on their tightrope. It was about building my own bridge, sturdy, deliberate, and entirely mine. One they were welcome to admire from a safe distance, but never again allowed to control. 1 year later, my life doesn't look like a fairy tale. It looks like freedom. My second company, the one Jackson helped me build from a couch and a shared vision, just crossed its third funding milestone. We've mentored 36 women founders so far, and next quarter, we're launching a grant for first-time entrepreneurs without family backing, the ones who, like me, had to build belief in themselves from the ground up. My original firm is thriving too, managed now by a team I trust, so I can spend more time doing what actually lights me up, guiding others, speaking, writing, teaching women how to protect their peace as fiercely as they protect their assets. My marriage, strong, steady, rooted in truth. Jackson still makes tea every morning, still listens without trying to fix. He doesn't complete me. He just walks beside me, which is more than enough. As for my parents, they've stayed quiet. Mostly. A card arrives on birthdays now. Small gifts on holidays. No grand gestures, no attempts to wedge their way into my life again. Just acknowledgments, carefully chosen, polite, measured, and I accept them. With grace, not need. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant releasing the weight of expectation and choosing to live fully in the life I'd built without their permission. Tonight I walk into the grand ballroom of our foundation's inaugural gala, an event I dreamed about on long nights when I felt invisible, undervalued, and exhausted from carrying too much for people who gave too little in return. The room is filled with the very women I once used to be, hungry for truth, for guidance, for proof that healing and success can coexist. And it's also filled with women I've helped become who they are now. A string quartet plays softly. The lighting is warm, laughter bubbles around the champagne bar. I pause before stepping onto the stage. I used to think love had to be earned, paid for in sacrifice and silence. Now I know better. Now I give love freely, to myself first, and then to others who've done the same hard work of becoming. The applause swells as I walk forward, steady and whole. Not someone's daughter, not someone's disappointment. Just Olivia, exactly who I was always meant to be. Want to hear more of this? Then click on the video on the right-hand side, which is even more shocking.